Hello. This is Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. I'm Pastor Eric Schaefer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive. And each week we talk to an interesting person around the community, around the nation, even around the world about the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. I'm so pleased today to have as our special guest, Bishop Megan Rohrer, the brand still new bishop of the Sierra Pacific Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. For those of you who don't know Lutheran geography, Sierra Pacific Synod is Northern California and Northern Nevada. San Francisco is the biggest city, but Sacramento's there and others. And Bishop Rohrer was recently elected, as she is I want to get this right, Megan, the first openly transgender bishop in a mainline Christian denomination, therefore the first in the ELCA. She's also an award-winning filmmaker, musician, and historian. And you may have seen her on TV like I did. We'll talk about that in a minute. So welcome, Bishop. We're so pleased that you're with us today.
Thank you. It's so great to be here, and we're 56 days in. So you can see what I know about being a bishop. 56.
Yes, wonderful. So when Bishop Eaton was elected the first time, and I've known her for many years, and she said to me afterwards, she said, it didn't sink in how important it was as the first woman presiding bishop until women of all ages, including little girls, started to talk to her. Are you finding that the same way as the first transgender bishop in the denomination and even in the country?
Yeah, I think I had kind of a hunch of how it would be because Bishop Gene Robinson had been elected, and so I had seen what it was like for the first gay male person to be elected a bishop. And then for the first kind of lesbians to be elected, and to know that, this might be a first since the Council of Nicaea, when they tried to put up barriers between trans people being pastors. And my cat McGee wants to tell you also that they think it's important, but not as important as being petted right now in this moment.
For the cat, yes, of course.
That's kind of the real life of it. And yeah, so I think it was a very quick understanding that it was a historic thing, as there was kind of pretty instant media attention about it. I think the New York Times had a story out about it before I even was able to drive home from the assembly.
Yes, I've seen the pieces on NPR. I saw the RNS story. And I've been active with RNS for many years, and and then I saw the Good Morning America piece. I just happened to be watching that morning, and there you were. And it was a lovely piece. So, what do you take of this? Why is there such fascination with this, do you think?
Well, I think that there are a lot of people who are delighted to be able to speak more openly about their own families. There are a lot of, maybe the number one people who reach out to me in congregations are grandmas of trans kids, trans kids of all ages, because when you're a grandma, they're your trans kid, even when they're adults and out and living in the world. And I think partly my election has to do with the fact that we studied gender violence, and we studied ways that gender affects people. And so I think, while it may seem out of the blue or surprising to some people, I think for those who were paying attention to kind of the thoughtfulness of what Lutherans were up to and studying, it feels to me like it's a natural result of some of the gender violence work that we've been doing, not only here in the United States, but through the Lutheran World Federation.
That's very true. That's very true. So you've had an interesting path to this job, and I wonder if you might say a little more about that. If I read the bio correctly, this, being a pastor is something that you've wanted a long time.
Yeah. So I grew up in South Dakota during a time when the Lutheran Church had maybe a hiccup of not remembering if all people are invited into the priesthood. There's a 20-year time period between 1989 and 2000 2009, when there were some barriers put up, maybe some ideas that maybe people shouldn't talk out loud about it, or that they should not be in relationships with other people. It kind of depended geographically where you lived. And so I was one of 18 pastors who were ordained extraordinarily, is what Bishop Christer Stendal called it. This idea that we used really old rules from the Lutheran Book of Confessions about what to do when bishops tried to require you to be celibate, how congregations could ordain pastors anyway. And so I was ordained through a process that was recognized as being very old in our church, but violating kind of some of the contemporary rules. And then in 2009, when after another thoughtful study process, we changed some rules and policies of our church. I had a right of what was it they called it? I don't remember what they called it, but the attempt was to make me ordinary. And I guess we could, in retrospect, wonder if it took or not, now that I get to wear purple shirts a lot. But it was a rite of reception that brought those who had been ordained extraordinarily during that time onto the official list of pastors. And so my election as bishop is not only historic because of how I personally identify and because of, my body makeup, but also because there was this group of advocates who we always proclaimed borrowed our authority from the future and knew that the Lutheran Church would come to a place where it would kind of be more congruent in its ministry policies as it was in its theology. And so I'm the first person who has been elected bishop that was ordained through this extraordinary process. And so while I don't think that I'm the only person who has authority or that's where authority resides from, it sort of feels like, as we approach my installation on September 11th, that maybe this is the moment we borrowed from. And so there is a sense of history, not only because my identity is unique, but also because of this movement of just thousands and thousands of Lutherans who kind of paved this path to make it possible for pastors like me to live openly and to try to be authentic in their lives and in their family relationships.
Wonderful. That's what I do remember. Those times I was on the church-wide staff at that time during part of that, and had the privilege of relating to the gay and lesbian groups at each church-wide assembly. That was one of my assignments, and it was a privilege in some strange times in those time periods, for sure. And,
oh yeah, we were precocious advocates. There were times when it was just having fun agitating a system that kind of knew the worthiness of all of God's faithful people, knew that Jesus loved and named and claimed everyone, but was having a hard time publicly living into it. And so I can only imagine the fun that would come from being the relator. Although there was lots of like rainbow knitted prayer shawls and the LGBT Lutherans threw fun parties. There were times when even the people who had come to be anti-LGBTQ at the assemblies would come to the LGBTQ kind of down rooms because it was where like the good music was and the best treats. And so,
I actually remember that they would, that those two groups would, what was it called? I can't remember what the group was called, the conservative group, but they would have a room next to yours, and it was friendly. It was not hostile.
Yeah. Well, we had a bit of a playful banter because we kept making them have to change their name because they would pick a Bible story about why they were right. And it would be like Solid Rock. They were Solid Rock Lutherans. And then so we would change the parable because the idea was like, you build your church on the solid rock. And so we would say, well, we're good soil, right? Because in the parable about seeds, the rock is where the seeds don't grow. And so they had to change their name to core, I think. And
core was, yes.
Images were made of eaten apples that were rotting or something like that. And so it was a playful banter of like, we love your Bible. We love the Bible too. So like, let's have this kind of playful relationship. And I remember in 2009, one of the things that gave me hope is that Pastor Irma Wolf, who was the head of the group that kind of was working to maintain the policies for LGBTQ pastors. She came up to me right before the vote and she said, Megan, it's so good to see you. If the ELCA's work was more like yours, would be headed in the right direction, because we agreed on homeless work and I was doing full-time ministry
right.
in Hungary. And she said, let's pray together before this vote. And I'm certain we were praying for exact opposite outcomes of this vote. But because the way that we were Lutheran and the way that we were, it just wasn't the same as other groups where there was vitriol or anger. There was kind of this idea of, well, you seem faithful and we're faithful, and, you know, majority votes fall one way or the other, and let's still be in relationship with each other after this. And that story actually inspired a blog where Irma Wolf and I were the first people to write for the ELCA on the 1-year anniversary of the policy change. And it was called Living Lutheran, the idea of how people who are who are opposed on public issues could still live together as Lutherans. And so and then the tiny little blog now is the name of the magazine, right?
Amazing. You know, what a concept, you know, and kind of important today with all that's going on in society, that how can we live together with different opinions about politics or whatever. And
well, it gives me hope. It gives me hope that there are ways that even when we have the largest disagreements that we could possibly have on ideas, that Lutherans are people who can still have civil conversations, that we're people who can pray together, even if we're praying for opposite things, and that we can know that God loves us regardless of how much we might screw it up, even if we screw it up and enjoy it, I think is how far Martin Luther goes. This idea that there is a way of being faithful together, and even when we change our mind or reform our mind or whatever it is that happens next for our Lutheran church, that we can be people who are community. And that gives me a lot of personal hope in times where public conversation sometimes isn't always that civil.
Wonderful. Now, I've read that and heard you speak on that one of your hopes, dreams, plans in being a bishop is to take the public side, the public square side of the church more seriously. Can you share a little bit with our viewers about what that means to you and how you see that playing out in your first 2 months of this?
That's right. Well, I am someone who has been using kind of online ministry tools for over 15 years and live stream Bible studies. And so kind of had a heart and a passion for ways that we can communicate Bible study, that we can talk about God's love beyond kind of the geographical boundaries of cities or beyond the geographical boundaries of church spaces. I have always really appreciated the part of the Constitution that says that bishops are public theologians. They're the people who help have theological conversations about what's going on in their synods. And certainly that can go south in a way of like, preach this way or I'll be mad. That's not what I mean by that. But to be someone who can demonstrate having public conversations that are civil with people that you disagree with, to demonstrate publicly that we can be people who learn, that we can be people who apologize, that ask for forgiveness when we are folk who miss the mark, and to be someone who is going to talk about Jesus on the biggest platform I'm allowed to talk about Jesus about. And so like, if you did see any of those TV shows or Good Morning America, people ask me a lot of questions about me. And my response tends to be about Jesus or about God or about love or about the ways that we can be community together, or just to say out loud, consider being a Lutheran, because sometimes the only people who are in those spaces or talking about God either are doing it from a platform of everyone who doesn't agree with me is wrong, or we're really great on TV and loving and hospitable, and then we never mention we're Lutheran and people don't know how to join us and pray with us and be in community with us. And so I'm a firm believer that good news needs to be good news. So if you got to do a lot of gymnastics to prove why it's good, or to prove why it's love, then I'm probably less interested in that debate, and more interested in ways that we can support people, help them with grief, love them where they are, and do those things that most Lutherans agree on, which is feeding the poor, showing up for the hungry, caring for people in the midst of disasters. And there's a lot of stuff to be really proud about with the Lutheran Church. And this idea that we don't have to have an exact right answer for Jesus to claim us, I think gives us a lot of permission to love people all in whatever ways that they might be outside of what is expected for them.
Oh, this is close to my heart, my friend.
Yeah.
And well, yeah, I mean, we're just so modest, and we have 10% of all the nursing home beds in the country. Who knows that? We settle more refugees than anybody but the Catholic Church. Who knows that? We are the major agency for settling these unaccompanied children coming across the border. Yeah. What was the IRS looking for? 5,000 foster parents. I sit on, it's one of my passions. I sit on the President's Council for Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. So that's one of my many passions. And you know that I share the passion for homeless work that you do. Yeah. So, we are just so darn Scandinavian, German, modest in our history. And it's fascinating to me. It's also discouraging to me in that sense, so I'm so proud that you're going to take a more public stance, and you have this blessing of being the first transgender bishop, that you have a platform, as you say, where you can answer their questions, but you can add your own gospel message, and I'm very proud of you, my friend. Very proud.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that, and if there's anything that I think is important to just name for people, is that you can be humble and still be in the spotlight, right? Because you can be on a big platform thanking people. You can be on a big platform being grateful for people, or just expressing hope for the future, which is radically, diametrically opposed to most of the news media, which is expressing fear. And so to be someone who is a public witness, who's willing to take a breath and love people wherever they are on every side of an issue, and to, of course we have our own personal opinions and our own dreams for our family members, but to be thankful for the folk who are just doing all of this important work. I mean, think of all of the Lutheran chaplains who have served in Afghanistan, the Lutheran chaplains who are caring for folk in hospitals, the Lutherans who are doctors and nurses. And like Florence Nightingale was trained by Lutheran deaconesses, and she's the person who came up with the idea of isolating people who are sick from people who are not sick. This whole sheltering in place comes from like Lutheran training. And we don't share that because we need credit or we care about who gets the credit. We share that because there is something in our faith and the way that we love our neighbors that inspires us to work with the wisdom that comes from science and with the wisdom that comes from best practices and how to care for people who are on the margins. And I just think it's such a breath of fresh air for me to be able to have a big platform to thank people who have been doing incredible work and to lift up what folk are up to.
Yeah. Well, it's not about us. It's about the work. It's about the ministry. Yeah. And as long as we keep our head on straight about that, but the work, the ministry, the call needs a mouthpiece.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to apologize for that.
Yeah.
There you are.
Except for when we do. Sometimes we'll apologize.
Oh, yeah. We're Lutherans. We apologize for everything. But
then we'll try again tomorrow. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Luther told us to sin boldly, and he certainly made enough mistakes, and some dramatic that we regret, for example. But still, what a great example of humanity and not being afraid to be a leader.
Well, yeah, I was really struck by visiting Wartburg Castle. This idea that, the Reformation in my imagination was like, oh, he had this great idea and he knew it was a great idea. And sure, the Pope was mad, but the Pope was wrong. And so it's fine that the Pope was mad. But going to the castle where Luther's friends have to drag him away because everybody's mad at him. And he takes that time to then try to keep translating good news into good news. He had helpers. There were Bible scholars who were helping him, but he wanted words to be poetry so people could connect with God, even in the midst of, people being really certain that he should not be alive and keep saying the things that he's saying. And so that for me is kind of a barometer and a compass of, yeah, you might be the kind of person that every once in a while people aren't certain if it's too far, or you might say a thing that is dangerous or is something the world isn't ready for yet. But if in my orientation in the world, my goal is to keep translating good news into good news for everyone who has ears to hear it, or the ability to read sign language or Braille, or all the ways that people are going to take in good news, then I want that to be my focus. And so if it turns out someday Jesus is mad at me in the pearly gates or wherever the conversation happens, to be able to say, I tried my best to love as many people as I could and to translate the good news the best I could. And let's work on all the other stuff I need to work on, because I'm here to learn, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. So before we go, though, these are hard times for a lot of people. I mean, our church people, even at the best, are getting tired after 18 months, 20 months of COVID. It's discouraging. I mean, I did a special piece on worship last week saying that it was a soul-crushing week with Afghanistan and with Haiti and with fires and going on. So for those people that are really feeling crushed these days, what is your word for people that are just really, both in our church and in society, that are just really discouraged?
I mean, I honestly think just naming that feeling discouraged is how one ought to feel right now, is a place to start. That it's such a blessing that you have not gone numb. There are a lot of people who have gone numb and who are trying to zone out. And if you got to zone out every once in a while, that's kind of how we refresh and restart, like when you reboot a computer so that it starts functioning again. What I have heard in the past is that anger fuels pastors, anger fuels justice. And so today might not be the day. Today might be the day that you're soaking in the energy that you need to have the energy to do tomorrow's justice activity, even if it's just handing out peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to people or funding an important project. That my sense is that the grief that we have right now in the world is very deep, and the pain that we're experiencing is very real. We have trauma upon trauma upon trauma that we haven't been able to have full times to heal from. When you have a moment where something helps, dwell in it as long as you can, even if that's taking a deep breath and remembering that moment when Jesus comes back to the disciples after the resurrection and says, "Peace, be still," and breathes on them, right? Just if there is a hymn that is working for you, play that hymn as often as you can to find those moments of hope or the moments of connection. If the ways that you find joy have changed, keep seeking out more ways to find joy, or dwell in the one flower that looks awesome, right? Pictures of better times, imaginations of vacations you'd love to go on. The more you can kind of soak yourself in and continue to have an imagination that better things are possible. And that's what I think hope is. It's just refusing to give up your imagination. It's continuing to always encourage people to imagine beyond what seems tangible what seems like it's the reality, but to continue to imagine more opportunities. And I think that's what Jesus was really good at doing, was even in the midst of like dry, worn out, weary desert places where there was no food and everyone must have been crabby. After John the Baptist dies, Jesus just lost his cousin. He's trying to mourn in the wilderness and be alone. And people follow him anyway. And he has this change of heart, a splunknitzomai, change of care. And that's when Jesus says the Beatitudes. In the midst of his grief, in the midst of wanting to be alone and being bothered. And so know that sometimes our connection to faith and our comfort and our hope finds us in those uncomfortable spaces, not because you got to be uncomfortable for God to find you, but because sometimes that's where the poetry happens. And so keep your eye open, keep your imagination open, and keep open the possibility that hope might find you, even when you think it's not possible.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being with us today. This has been Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California. I'm Pastor Eric Schaefer, the host of Hope Matters and the senior pastor here at Mount Olive. Our guest this week has been Bishop Megan Rohrer, who is the new bishop of the Sierra Pacific Synod of our Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and the first openly transgender bishop in a mainline Christian denomination. And Bishop, thank you for being with us. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
And also with you.